Hello. I don't know if you can hear me through the mic or whether it's just my BBC voice projecting in a stentorian fashion. Welcome, everyone, to one of the opening sessions of the Vienna Humanities Festival. My name is MISHA GLENNY. I'm the rector of the Institute for Human Sciences here in Vienna. I'd like to thank everyone in advance who's made this possible, all the people who work at the IWM and our partner organization, Time to Talk, and to thank everyone at the Academy here, volunteers who have made this possible, and the fact that we are holding this in such a beautiful location. Truly we are blessed. So this is, to my mind, a very special session with Ron Deibert, who is the founder of an organization called Citizen Lab. It's difficult to know how to describe the importance of Ron Deibert's achievements because he and his team have been working for over a decade now, basically hunting out malfeasance on the internet and related technologies carried out primarily by governments. And what he has uncovered is really sensational. Whenever Citizen Lab put out a statement or a report, journalists from all over the world leap upon it and study it with great care because they know that invariably there will be a sensational revelation as to what governments and other actors have been up to. Now, Ron is a particularly interesting character because by training, he works at the Munk School on Global Affairs and Public Policy at the University of Toronto. By training, he's a political scientist. So he understands security issues, geopolitical issues, but he's one of those rare people who's also a bit of a nerd, if he doesn't mind me saying so, and he understands technology. And those people who understand politics and the details of technology are actually incredibly important for us around the world because technology, which determines so much of what we do, is very little understood by the billions of us who have become dependent upon it. And so Ron's role of a guardian of all of our interests is incredibly important. So I want to start by asking, Ron, the first time I came across your work was in something called GhostNet. Can you explain about what GhostNet was and how it emerged and developed?
Sure, happy to do so, and thank you everyone for coming, and thank you, Misha, for the invitation. GhostNet, okay, that was actually the very first public report on cyber espionage ever. There had been reports on cyber espionage in the classified realms before GhostNet, but it was the first evidence-based public report on the topic, something now that is routinely featured almost every week you hear about in the news. It had its origins in the office of the Dalai Lama in Dharamsala. So Tibetan organizations who are based there suspected they were being spied on by the Chinese government, a reasonable suspicion. Strange things were happening. People were crossing borders, were being asked about where they were traveling, and it appeared that the officials asking the questions had prior knowledge. Private information was being circulating somehow. Or the Dalai Lama was going to have an official visit, and there would be pressure from the Chinese government preceding that visit, And the question was, well, how did they know we were going to visit with this official or that party? Our researchers went to Dharamsala and essentially examined the computers there. And we discovered that indeed their computers were thoroughly hacked. And in the course of doing the analysis, we discovered that the perpetrators of this hack had made the mistakes themselves. They left open a window into their internal operations. And this window allowed us to see everyone else that they were also hacking. So we saw the Tibetans, the Office of the Dalai Lama, but also among the victims were ministries of foreign affairs, embassies, media organizations. I recall that one of the main mail servers of Associated Press was hacked by these perpetrators. So we spent, as part of the team investigating this, this was part of a project called the Information Warfare Monitor, 8 months just watching and observing and documenting. And then in, I think it was April 2009, it was published and it was front page news on the New York Times. Actually, it was the first also real important manifestation for us as a research group doing what I set out to do when I created the Citizen Lab. I made a proposal for the Citizen Lab back in the early 2000s, and I looked at the proposal recently. It was to the Ford Foundation for a project, and I described my desire to create a counterintelligence for civil society based at an academic unit. My theory was that governments and corporations were doing things behind the scenes in the digital realm, in the information space, and there weren't enough people watching. And academic centers had a unique strength where you have all of this technical expertise in computer science and engineering science that could be leveraged to watch the watchers. And so this report, the GhostNet report, was the first of its kind, and it made what, I guess in that early proposal, which was all hubris, you know, saying we want to create a counterintelligence for civil society, somebody looking at that would go, who is this guy? What is he talking about? But that was the first time I would say we really yielded fruit.
So, and what was the consequence of GhostNet? Because presumably you then got a lot of attention.
We did.
Yeah.
The consequence was pretty significant. First of all, it was on that day, it was the biggest news story of that day, and for a few days it was on the front page of the New York Times and just about every media organization, which itself was pretty surreal, having not been in that position before, to be in a coffee shop and looking at the Dalai Lama on CNN talking about this. He said, I have nothing to hide. Why are they spying on me? Which was funny. But also, of course, it put the Citizen Lab on the radar of both my own government, which also said, wait a minute, what is this organization doing peeking into these shadowy realms? We're not controlling them. This could cause problems for us here in Canada, and I'm sure many other governments. And of course, since then, I obviously can't travel to China. I've never been to China since that report. It would be much too risky for me to do that. But more practically speaking, it opened up a whole terrain of research for us that has continued since. In other words, tracking espionage. So we really refined the methods. Back then, we were looking at desktop computers and really didn't know what we were doing, I would say. And over the last, since that time, 13 years, our methods have become much more refined. But more importantly, the practice of espionage that we uncovered there has exploded and amplified worldwide. And there is now an enormous industry that provides governments with the capabilities, the products and services to do that type of espionage.
When you were still at the desktop computer stage, were you able to identify what is a government hack what is an organized crime hack, what is a sort of script kiddie, someone who's doing it for fun, as it were. Can you see straight away what the traits of different hacks are?
Well, that's a really good question, because this comes up all the time, up to and including the last report we published, a significant report on a European case, which we may talk about, Catalan Gate, extensive domestic espionage operation in Spain. The way I think about this is what we're doing is kind of like a crime scene investigation. So we're going into a murder scene, and you can say, okay, for sure this person was murdered. You can even say it was using this weapon because we have the shell casing. It's a Remington, let's say. So we know what tool was used to kill this person. But saying who actually did it is sometimes much more difficult. You're usually relying on various layers of circumstantial evidence. Even in that first GhostNet report, one of the things that I'm proud of, if you go back and read it, we decided to include a section on attribution, whodunit, right? And we weighed the different possibilities. And alternative hypotheses is the way we phrased it at the time. And people kind of thought that was needlessly pedantic. Obviously, it's the Chinese government. We said, well, maybe it could be somebody else. I thought it was the Chinese government, but as an academic, I thought we should carefully weigh the evidence for it. And that's almost the sense in the same situation in every investigation we do.
Because, of course, quite common is this idea of the false flag, where
that's part of it.
One state will make it look as though another state is doing the hacking in order to throw people off the scent.
That's right. And the other part of it is the companies that supply governments with the products and services to do the hacking go to great lengths to obfuscate their infrastructure. So you're looking usually at a complicated picture. But I will say that even the most sophisticated mercenary spyware vendors, that's what we call it, mercenary spyware, leave digital breadcrumbs. And so we have, I would say we're unique in this regard worldwide, have developed a pretty good visibility into the infrastructure of most of the top spyware vendors. And through that, you can sometimes piece together bits of evidence that say, pretty sure this is Saudi Arabia. We don't know exactly which agency. We're, of course, not there in the room, the air-conditioned bunker in Riyadh where someone's pressing the button. But based on the internet traffic, you can say this is probably the Saudi operator.
So let's go from that stage when you're still working on desktop computers, and then you see the rise of the smartphone. When does this start to impact on your work? And explain to us the importance of that transition.
I would say there's a singular event, and that was the Arab Spring. So you had, of course, everyone will remember this phenomenal moment in time where we had these street demonstrations. People were describing this as a social media revolution, digitally enabled popular mobilization. There were some events preceding it, like the Green Movement in Iran and the colored movements even in the former Soviet space. What happened there was people started relying on these devices to organize their lives, including popular demonstrations. For most of us, the lesson that we drew was that, oh, the internet and mobile technology is liberalizing and democratizing the world, and it's empowering civil society. The lesson that the autocrats themselves took was the exact opposite. They looked at those events, they watched CNN during the time of the Arab Spring, and I imagine they turned to their security chief and they said, how do we prevent that from ever happening here? And they went out and they found this extraordinary market that was just emerging then of products and services designed to help governments undertake targeted surveillance. And at the same time, it was very convenient that everybody was then migrating towards having their lives funneled through a single all-purpose, always-on device. that tracks everything that you do. So there's been a confluence of factors that has contributed to this explosion of this surveillance industry centered on hacking mobile devices.
So who are these firms and companies who the Egyptian authorities say start discussing with that they may want to use some of their products? Where are they? How did they emerge?
Yeah, so these companies range across a spectrum. There are some very sophisticated ones. Most of them are based in Israel for a variety of reasons that we could get into if you want. Many people in the room might have heard of something called Pegasus, which is manufactured by an Israeli-based company called NSO Group. It's a good example of the type of company in this space. So these are veterans of Israel's Signals Intelligence Agency, people who have exceptional engineering skills at the highest possible level, especially around surveillance, who have effectively privatized their skills. And so what they do is they supply to governments the ability to hack into phones. Israel is unique because of the exceptional talent and the fact that the government encourages entrepreneurialism. They actually like this sort of thing, which is why you often see in the surveillance sector, most of the leading firms around facial recognition, biometric surveillance, surveillance technology, spyware, tend to be Israeli or have some Israeli connection. But then there are other companies worldwide. In fact, there's a hack-for-hire firm just down the river here called DSurf that Microsoft outed about a month ago. That is
what were the Austrians, what was DSurf up to?
According to Microsoft, they were involved in exactly what we're talking about, selling hacking, boutique hacking services to a range of clients targeting victims, mostly it seems business victims in Austria, United States, Panama, and several other places.
So I want to stay a tiny little bit with Israel, because this is really fascinating. It's got a small population of about 8.5, 9 million. It has this unit that you talked about, 8200, which is the largest unit in the Israeli Defense Force. And they just produce this extraordinary number of sophisticated computer engineers, software engineers, AI specialists, and so on. And so this tiny country dominates I mean, it has such an impact on the security industry, it's quite extraordinary. Does that link back to Israel's security, or is this just a way of making money, do you think?
It's
I mean,
both.
does it have political implications, I suppose, is what I mean.
My feeling is that it is both. It's a bit of both. So greed explains a lot in the world, especially today, unfortunately. And this is a very lucrative industry, valued well over tens of billions of dollars. So people are lining their pockets from these sales. But then there's an obvious geopolitical component to it as well. So NSO Group is... Its sales are overseen by the Ministry of Defense, which issues export licenses. So the Israeli state can shape to some degree where NSO sells. And also perhaps, I have no evidence for this, but there is suspicion that there might be some more direct connection in terms of the data that NSO collects on behalf of its clients. Put it this way, if I was a government client and I didn't want the state of Israel to know who I was spying on, I wouldn't contract with NSO Group. So it's an interesting phenomenon. You're right about that, because just on the talent level, you have hundreds of engineers, probably by anyone's estimation, coming from a state that is ranked in the top 5 in terms of global signals intelligence surveillance capabilities, now a private company. What that means is a game changer, because it enables poorly resourced governments, especially in the global south, to effectively purchase their own NSA off the shelf.
Wow.
That's unprecedented in history.
Wow.
To have that capacity. We had a case in 2018 where we unearthed an espionage campaign that Ethiopia undertook using the surveillance capabilities of a company called Cyberbit that is also based in Israel. They could spy on individuals in more than 20 countries worldwide. That's Ethiopia, one of the poorest countries in the world with less than, I don't know, 20% internet penetration.
So it's not just in their own countries they're undertaking this surveillance, they're able to spread it out because, of course, the internet is global.
Exactly, and that's why we're seeing a related outcome of what we're talking about here. People are describing as the spread of transnational repression. So government clients of this type of technology have an interest in hacking into the devices, especially of people who are located abroad, journalists, human rights defenders, refugees. Great example is the unfortunate case of Jamal Khashoggi. We all know he was executed. We at the Citizen Lab forensically examined the devices of a number of his close associates based in Canada and the UK. Their phones were hacked prior to Jamal being murdered. We now know, based on forensic evidence that we and Amnesty International did on his wife's phone and his fiance's phone, both of those were hacked with Pegasus spyware prior to his murder. So we don't know what happened to Jamal's devices because they were taken by Turkish authorities. But we do know that everyone around him was under surveillance. Everyone with whom he was communicating was under surveillance. The mere knowledge of that in the diaspora community has created enormous chilling effect, psychological trauma. It's really the export of fear, right? So what used to be contained within your borders as an authoritarian regime, this type of despotism is now spreading internationally. And it's one of the reasons why I believe we're seeing the spread of authoritarian practices worldwide.
Wow. So your first impact was with GhostNet, but I think you're probably best known for the work on Pegasus spyware, the NSO group stuff. But tell me, this must have also had a counter-reaction against you. So tell us the story. This is a really amazing story about when the nefarious organization Black Cube starts coming after Citizen Lab, and why they did it and how they did it, because it's although it's very chilling, it's also wonderfully incompetent.
Well, you see, I don't know who that is, Misha, but maybe that's them, right? You know, I mentioned before in the proposal for the Citizen Lab, I literally described my mission to create a counterintelligence for civil society. At the time, it was all hubris. Fast forward 20 years later, and the old adage comes to mind, careful what you wish for. So we have become very successful at outing some of the world's most, not only powerful governments and corporations, but some of the most nasty, ruthless. And unfortunately, we see the consequences of that all the time. The episode that you're referring to is something that really disturbed me and my staff. We were targeted by a private intelligence firm that is also based in Israel called Black Cube. They are another version of this privatization of intelligence. In this case, private intelligence itself using human agents that are usually ex-Mossad. And what they tried to do was secretly tape conversations that ostensibly would incriminate myself and my staff, have us say something that they could then use to publicly discredit us. We actually organized a counter-sting with Associated Press journalists at a restaurant in New York. So you could Google Citizen Lab Black Cube and you will see the video of us actually turning the tables and outing this one agent who was working under a false identity.
So he asked for a meeting with you guys, right?
Yes, and we outfitted ourselves with cameras and had Associated Press journalists. Interestingly, what we didn't know at the time was that Black Cube was also following the journalist Ronan Farrow. Black Cube was also contracted separately at the same time by the convicted rapist Harvey Weinstein. And Ronan Farrow was doing investigative journalism on Weinstein. So Black Cube was following Ronan Farrow. The same agents who were following Farrow in New York were following Citizen Lab. And thankfully, one of these subcontractors gained a conscience, I would say, and realized what he was involved in was unethical. And so he spilled the beans to Ronan Farrow.
Wow.
And,
so that was a Black Cube operative?
Yeah, a subcontractor.
Right.
Based in New York, who is basically shepherding them around. He was in the restaurant when we were doing the counter-sting, and I've since come to know him. But it's in some ways, you look at this. If you read the story, I encourage you to Google it and take a look at it. It is quite humorous. The New York Times headline was "The Case of the Bumbling Spy," but I can tell you, it's not so funny when you're on the receiving end. I was saying to Misha, it's nerve-wracking to be in this position. Even coming to this wonderful city and this event is like being dropped into a spider's nest. Here we are in Austria and Vienna, the city of spies. Yeah.
Yeah,
Enough
because
said.
because until now you've been talking about Saudi Arabia, Ethiopia, Israel as the sort of generator of spyware. But then you came across what really disturbs me is that it's not just known authoritarian or national security states that engage in this sort of activity. Tell us what happened when you started looking at Spain.
Spain is a unique case, in part because it's in Europe. So the story there is back in 2019, we discovered that NSO Group had developed a version of Pegasus that was so sophisticated it could take over any mobile device without any user interaction, exploiting at that time a vulnerability in the WhatsApp application. So they would send a call over the WhatsApp application, exploit this vulnerability in the protocol, and take over the device. WhatsApp learned about this, and we contacted WhatsApp's security team, and they patched the issue, and then together with the Citizen Lab, we alerted all of the victims that they knew about, which were about 1,000 individuals worldwide. Of those, we ended up alerting about 140. Of those 140 worldwide, there were a significant number of Catalans. And so we realized something's probably up in Spain. And so we started from 2019 a very careful evidence-based project, enrolling people as human subjects. Being based at the university, we have to follow research ethics protocols. So if I want to analyze your phone, for example, I have to have you sign a consent form. And over the 2-year period, we discovered that more than 65 Catalans had been subjected to this type of hacking, including the last 4 presidents, either while in office, prior to taking office, or after they retired. Most of the senior elected officials of the Catalan government, sitting members of the Spanish parliament who are from Catalonia-based parties, Catalan civil society. Significantly, the mother and father of one of our own researchers, who happened to be a Catalan, had their devices hacked in a form of relational targeting to try to get access to what we were doing.
Just briefly explain what relational targeting is.
If you are the principal target, and I, for whatever reason, can't hack your phone, but you are aware that we're going to have this conversation right now, it's useful to hack my phone so I can eavesdrop on you, especially a close friend or family member. It's almost as useful as hacking the principal target. In any event, back to Spain, we called the report Catalan Gate. It was published in April of this year. And it was really an extensive domestic espionage operation. The Catalan issue in Spain is very controversial. That's a whole separate conversation. But what we do know is that there was this massive hacking campaign against almost all of Catalan's civil society and elected officials. Again here, who is responsible? Well, circumstantially, the evidence points to the Spanish government. After our report came out, the head of Spanish intelligence was sacked, but not before convening something called the Secret Commission. After our report came out, elected officials were brought before this never-before-convened thing they have in Spain, which I learned about, where she said, yes, they were right. We had authorization to spy on 18 of the 65 victims, but we can't say anything about the rest. And by the way, Citizen Lab is funded by the Chinese government. Now, I thought, if I was the head of intelligence, I would have at least Googled. You know, we did have that GhostNet report, and I can't travel to China, so I don't think we're funded by the Chinese.
So it's not just classic authoritarian governments. Member states of the European Union, most recently Greece has been involved in a similar operation.
Poland,
Hungary. Member states of the European Union are undertaking thoroughly illegal surveillance operations against their own citizens, or are they perhaps legal?
Well, that's the question, right? We are like physicians. We're coming in and we're diagnosing a disease, and we can say, yes, you have COVID, but you know, who is responsible for giving you COVID? That's for other people to determine. And unfortunately, it's quite disappointing, although maybe not surprising, that in all of the countries that you mentioned, which, by the way, these are all termed Watergate-style scandals in each of them, there hasn't been a Watergate-style response. I don't see a church committee in Spain. Instead, I see a lot of deflection or shooting the messenger, people describing us in ways that I just said, in order to deflect attention from the core issue. To me, this is a crisis of democracy when you have this quantum leap in surveillance capabilities. So imagine you have now a service provided to government security agencies that enables them to get into any phone without any evidence of tampering, without any notification to the target. 1 minute, your phone is fine, you're using it normally. The next, it's sending data to the secret intelligence agencies, and you're unaware. And they can turn on the microphone, turn on the camera, intercept every email and text message, even those that are encrypted, look at all your contacts, go back in time and look at all your movements, track you as you're moving through the city, gather your tokens, and even once the infection is cleaned, have access to all of your cloud accounts. This is to surveillance technology what nuclear is to weapons. It's a quantum leap forward in sophistication and power. So we've given police and intelligence agencies this great leap forward, godlike capabilities to get inside our minds.
Wow.
And the restraint mechanisms to prevent abuse are still from like the Victorian era. So the gap between those is where the prospect of the abuse of power lies.
Good God. Well, this is truly Orwellian, Ron. And
sorry to...
very appropriate for our title, The Age of Uncertainty. A couple of things before I throw it open to the audience. What about Apple? I went over to Apple products for security purposes primarily, because not so many people attacked Apple products because there weren't that many of them relative to Windows-based products or Linux-based products. And iPhones have the walled garden, which is much tighter than the Android phones. So I assumed that I was safe with Apple products, but then you found something else, didn't you?
Yeah, that's true, and I wouldn't say it's true as a criticism of Apple, because it's true Apple, I would say, spends more than any consumer tech company on the security of its device. So putting your hands in Apple and updating your security is very prudent. But recall what we said when we described NSO Group. These are engineers who come from the most sophisticated, one of the most sophisticated nation-state intelligence agencies, hundreds of them, that spend all day doing nothing but scouring operating systems, scouring applications, looking for the one security flaw that they can exploit. It's almost impossible to defend yourself against that as a tech company. Back in September, we actually captured a copy of Pegasus from a Saudi activist device. That was the second time we actually got lucky and captured a copy of the spyware. We reverse engineered it. By the way, that exploit took advantage of software flaws that Apple itself was unaware of. These are known in the industry as 0 days. They run on the order of several millions of dollars if you were to try to buy one in the black market. We did a responsible disclosure to Apple, and in September of last fall, they issued an emergency security patch to all Apple users in the world. So that one event impacted more than 1.3 billion people worldwide.
Wow.
By the way, the activist phone that we acquired that from, at the time, they didn't want to disclose their identity. It turned out after 3 months, this person decided to go public. Her name is Loujain Al-Hatoul. You may know that name because she is a very famous women's rights activist in Saudi Arabia who has been tortured and imprisoned repeatedly merely for advocating for the right for women to drive a car in Saudi Arabia unaccompanied. Those are the type of people that government clients of this type of technology consider criminals and terrorists.
Wow. Well, I hope that in the question someone's going to ask you about what we're going to do about this, but before we do, I couldn't help noticing I got, you can subscribe to Citizen Lab emails. They're very interesting because anything that comes out, you see it first. So for example, that Apple flaw that you saw, yes. I saw it on Citizen Lab, and the minute the security patch came out from Apple, and this is something I recommend that people do anyhow. If you get something flashing on your phone saying software update, do it straight away, because invariably there's a security aspect to it and your vulnerability will be covered by that, the so-called patch. So just when Ron was flying over here, I got a Citizen Lab email with an absolutely extraordinary story that Citizen Lab has just uncovered. Could you briefly describe this?
Well, we received a tip from a Reuters journalist, Joel Shechtman, that an Iranian who was an asset of the CIA, who had been tortured and imprisoned, had been instructed to communicate with this Central Intelligence Agency through a website. This is back in the 2000s. And the Reuters journalist showed us the website, and one of our researchers analyzed it. And on the basis of just that single website, he was able to unravel a very poorly secured CIA covert communications network of 855 websites that were used to communicate with assets. The big problem around the insecurity is we know back in the 2000s, China and Iran executed at least a dozen, maybe more, CIA assets. And it had to do with this very poor covert communication system. It's extraordinary that they could put people's lives so frivolously at risk. So we chose not to publish that report, and instead we're going to deliver copies of it to appropriate congressional oversight bodies. We're in the process of doing that as we speak.
God. So let me throw it open to the audience. I can see a hand back there. Yes, I think that's you. You should have a microphone coming towards you.
Thank you very much, Ron. My name is Thomas Lohninger, and I'm working for an Austrian data protection organization. We're an NGO, and we're also happy to announce that, right now, government spyware is illegal in Austria, as the Constitutional Court ruled it to be unconstitutional in 2019. But yet, we do have a problem here in the city of spies, and it's called DSIRF. According to a Microsoft announcement that I'm sure you've seen, this Viennese company has produced government spyware called Notweed or Sub-Zero that was used in the UK, Panama, and in Austria as well. And my first question is, would you have come across any of these versions of the spyware? If you can say so, it would be really helpful. Mm-hmm. And the second one is more on practical notes, because we hope to achieve with DSRF what has happened with Finfisher in Germany, to basically bring this company into bankruptcy. And we also expect that they have not obtained export licenses to export their dual-use goods outside of Europe. There are 2 parliamentary inquiries from the Social Democrats and the Liberals asking the Economic Ministry exactly that question. But for all of that to work, we would need to know that they are victims, because only with those we could bring a case to court. And so it would be really helpful if people like netzpolitik.org in Germany or we in Austria would be known to the victims, that this is an avenue for them to explore, to get justice, to have others really bring this to litigation. And I would just like to know in my second question if there is a policy, whether you would forward contact details to any of these NGOs to potential victims so that they could get help. Thank you.
So this begins to address the issue of what do we do about all this?
Yes, yeah, that's true. And thank you very much for your work in this country. You mentioned the firm that I actually brought up with Misha a few minutes ago, just down the river, I think. They're located. So Microsoft issued a threat alert about this company. I was aware of the company. We were aware of some of the broad details, and we've been looking at the business structure. I'll say as an aside, most of these companies operate very complicated ownership structures that often involve multiple shareholders and private equity firms. And they do that deliberately to evade accountability. And I tell you, looking at DSIRF is interesting in that regard for some of the characters that are involved. It looks to me like there are some interesting Russian connections to this company, first of all. Secondly, victims. 2 things. One is the way the Citizen Lab undertakes its research, it's not like we have some kind of magic global scan where we see victims of everyone. We work opportunistically on the basis of our visibility into the infrastructure of some of the companies, which has to come through some opportunity. If we capture a copy of the spyware, we can reverse engineer it and start mapping their network infrastructure. And usually that means interacting with a victim. As a matter of policy, we tend to work with civil society only. So that means we have to come across somebody, which is a matter of luck, really. So the answer is no, we haven't seen any victims. So we are just reading about this like other people are, but it's definitely on our radar. In terms of notifying civil society organizations or others about victims, should we come across it, this is one other thing that distinguishes the Citizen Lab from NGOs. The Citizen Lab is a professor's research lab. We're based at the University of Toronto. That means, first and foremost, that we have to respect research ethics protocols. So any human, this Loujain al-Hatul, people around Jamal Khashoggi, they are treated the same way that individuals are who undertake maybe an experiment, psychological experiment or a medical experiment. at a university. They're treated ethically, and first and foremost, that means you have to protect their confidentiality. So we would never disclose to any third party who victims are ourselves. The victims themselves have to do it. We may say somebody would like to meet you and talk to you. That's their decision to make.
Madam.
Thank you very much. My name is Ivan Novotny. I used to be in the Foreign Service. I'm now president of the board of the University of Vienna. I congratulate you on this very interesting and slightly disturbing presentation. And I apologize, I have a very pedestrian question. Okay. The pedestrian question is the following. You described your activity as forensic detection, and I find that very appropriate definition. On the other side, I assume that there are the perpetrators who have every interest, vested interest, in blocking what you are doing. And my question is, are we entering a race here, where your methods are constantly developing and being more sophisticated, and on the other side, the counteraction will be more sophisticated again? Which relates a little bit to the question of Misha Glenny. I mean, what are we going to do about it?
Yep. Yeah? That's an excellent question. Thank you for that. You are absolutely right, the way you characterize this cat and mouse game. We have some very talented people. We're a small shop. We have extraordinary visibility into some of the different vendors. And we withhold some of the signatures, let's call them, or fingerprints that we use to identify their actions so that we can maintain that visibility. We know that companies like NSO Group alter their operations based on what the Citizen Lab is doing. We are their principal threat or risk, but they don't know everything that we know up until now. At a certain point in time, we may lose that visibility, which I think points to the second part of what you're raising here, is what to do about this. At the moment, we are just chasing down malfeasance worldwide. What we are advocating for, along with a large group of civil society networks and elected officials, is the need for urgent regulation. If you think about the sophistication of the technology I just described, nuclear-level surveillance capabilities, godlike capabilities in the hands of despicable people who have used it demonstrably with lethal consequences. We need to do something about that. Or liberal democracy is in trouble. Because wherever this type of spyware emerges as a scandal, you see it being used against elected officials, democratic opposition, human rights defenders, especially investigative journalists, lawyers. So the very foundations of liberal democracy are being targeted and eroded. You know, this industry is almost entirely unregulated right now. Governments could do things to hold this industry accountable. In the United States, there have been some significant developments. We gave testimony to the House Intelligence Committee. United States, I don't need to tell anyone here, so polarized. Basically, the parties cannot agree on anything. Remarkably, the House Intelligence Committee introduced bipartisan legislation to regulate and watch this industry. Just yesterday, Adam Schiff and his colleague at the House Intelligence Committee sent President Biden a letter advocating for all of the things that I would advocate for as well. That's in the United States. We need governments like Austria, Canada, asleep at the wheel on this issue. We need governments to wake up. The big problem here is that they're all conflicted. You worked at the foreign ministry. I'm sure you're aware. Every government has a secret service. They benefit from this type of technology. They don't want to give it up. It's highly addictive to be able to get in someone's entire life and anticipate everything they're going to do. Imagine if you and I were having a negotiation, and I could, for months leading up to that negotiation, know everything that you're going to bring to the table. That is like cocaine for diplomats. We need to regulate it because it is undoubtedly being used for widespread harm right now.
Ivan, you wanted to, and then after that, Rebecca.
Thank you very much. Very fascinating discussion. And you mentioned cocaine. So let me ask you, is there any positive use of this to check the mafias of this world?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's an excellent question. Thank you for that. So the world is a bad place. There's lots of criminal activity. Read McMafia if you want to learn about it. Or watch it, I guess, too.
Yes, watch it. It's fun.
No doubt about it. Law enforcement is essential to a liberal democratic society. We need law enforcement to be properly trained and well-equipped. I am a father. I don't want to get on an airplane and have that airplane explode. I don't want to see horrible child abuse sexual material online. There are all sorts of good reasons for law enforcement to undertake sophisticated surveillance. It's not a question of whether that should happen or not. It's a question of under what circumstances. Right now, we have a situation, as I described, where suddenly, just within the last decade, law enforcement and intelligence agencies are enjoying a quantum leap in capabilities. But our safeguards to prevent the abuse of power have actually remained fixed or have actually descended. So that's the problem right now. We lack oversight. I was speaking to a Polish journalist earlier today and asking, do you know what your intelligence services or your security agencies are doing in this country? It's the same, frankly, in my country. They still live in a kind of Cold War era box where it's forbidden to speak about what they're doing. We don't really know. Oversight is flimsy at best, very weak. That needs to change in light of the spectrum that I'm talking about here.
Madam.
Thank you very much for your deliberations. I'm scared stiff. I don't think I'm going to turn on my mobile phone again.
You seem to have that reaction.
Okay. Sometimes you don't even need to turn it on.
I know, yeah, you can throw it away and it still does something. Yeah. Okay, I'm a private person. I don't work for any kind of government agency. To my knowledge, I haven't done anything very wicked, but I have twice had really strange phone calls from the FBI saying that I am wanted and that there are serious allegations against me. And a couple of my friends have also had similar ridiculous hoax calls. Yeah. So my question is twofold. First of all, what can I do about it? And secondly, I would like to know who are the people behind these kind of calls? Are they just students having fun, or are they people being paid? Okay, I stand before you as a wanted criminal, but I would like to have an answer to these questions. Thank you.
Thank you for that question. Well, the unfortunate reality right now is that there is no defense for the type of spyware that I'm describing here of the highest possible level. There really is nothing you can do to protect yourself if you want to actually use one of these devices that we all now must carry around with us if we want to live today. Fortunately, most people are unlikely to be a target. If you look at the number of Apple users, of those 1.3 billion, they wouldn't disclose to me how many people they notified. By the way, they notified every single victim they could find after we did that responsible disclosure. And they said it was a very, very small proportion, right? But that's small comfort to most people. You know, the sad situation is we've now come to depend on a digital ecosystem that is invasive by design, but highly insecure. From the devices that we carry in our pockets and all of the applications contained within them, right down to the most foundational layer, the telecommunications networks, and everything in between. It's really like a house of cards. And this is because for the last 20 years, the principal philosophy driving the business model has been to move out products, move out applications as quickly as possible, and offload the security vulnerabilities to the users. And so really there is no liability for a company to push out something that creates an insecurity that gets taken advantage of this way. We need to change that. We need to repair the entire ecosystem. That is an extraordinarily difficult problem. When you think about the international scope of engineering development that goes on and the sunk costs, the legacy technologies that are implicated in something so simple as a text message from here in Austria to my family in Canada. It travels over a vast, complicated physical infrastructure that has insecurity all throughout it. That is a big, big, complicated problem to fix.
I think I'd just add there in terms of your FBI calls, this is almost certainly a criminal gang which is doing it, and that is the beginning of a process which is designed to extract money from you, to extort you basically. And when you get those kind of calls, basically ignore them and block the number. I would say at the moment, there's almost no point in alerting the police to it because police are so overwhelmed that these sorts of things, are very difficult to track. But just, if you don't know where a call is coming from, if you don't recognize the number, if they're accusing you of having violated federal law or whatever, just ignore it and block. Adam.
I'm coming with a truly pedestrian question. So do we all need to accept total transparency? And what is, until legislation is going to catch up, and what device are you carrying?
I personally don't think we should accept total transparency. A liberal democracy has as its core the right to privacy for good reason. You want to have a space where you're not subjected to this type of scrutiny, where people can think about things that may be controversial in a particular situation. So we need regulation to ensure that that happens. It's simply the fact that we've gone through an accelerated change in terms of how we communicate, fundamentally reliant on these pocket devices that 10 years ago, we really didn't have. 15 years ago, they didn't exist to the extent that they do now. So we've gone through this rapid change, quantum leap forward in how we communicate with each other and do things. But the norms around and laws around privacy just haven't caught up. I think it's possible to do something about that. It's essential if we want to have a liberal democracy, because the alternative is a wholesale totalitarian surveillance society. I don't want to live in that society. That's why I do what I do. My own device, it helps that I'm in a lab with the world's best investigators on this topic, and I simply open myself up to them, and I do whatever they tell me to do. And I'm subjected constantly to the level of scrutiny that we apply to the human subjects of our research. That gives me some assurance, but there are also things that I can't avoid doing. So coming into a city like Vienna here, I just assume I'm a blinking light on someone's dashboard. And I try to reduce that exposure as much as possible.
And we've got one quick question down here, and because it's being posed by my wife, I have to accept it, even though we're almost out of time.
Just very quickly, because you mentioned Pegasus a couple of times, I just wondered if you could just tell us a little bit more about that.
Pegasus is the spyware that's manufactured by NSO Group. It is the most notorious in part because of our research and that of Amnesty International. We're the only two organizations really, mostly, that have actually been tracking this spyware and this company over the last, I guess since 2016 was when they first came on our radar. The exploit that we captured from the Saudi victim last fall, Google did an independent analysis of Pegasus spyware. You can read about it. They called it the most technologically sophisticated spyware that they had ever seen. This is Google's Threat Intelligence Center. So the latest version of Pegasus can take over any phone without any user interaction. So there's no need to answer a call from the FBI or click on a link on an attachment or receive a text message that tries to trick you into clicking on a link. It silently takes over your device. That capability is in the hands of dozens of governments worldwide, including some of the world's worst human rights abusers responsible for targeted assassinations. Paul Kagame in Rwanda, that government is a client of NSO Group. Mohammed bin Salman.
Well, if you weren't feeling uncertain about the world an hour ago, I hope you bloody well are now. I think we ought to give Ron a really special round of thanks for what was an astonishing talk.
Thank you. Thank you, Misha.